staying with us. The global economy is facing a challenging times. Even the U.S. economy seems to be in trouble. Donald Trump's trade wars with China have added to global uncertainty. But what does that mean for South Africa? Let's cross now via Skype to Sam Rowland. He is an independent economist and joins us now via Skype from Cape Town. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. Now, the U.S.-China trade war, a trade fight between Japan and South Korea, Germany's export-led economy shrinking for a second quarter, and of course then there's the looming British exit from the EU, which is not expected to be pretty. Are we looking at a dangerous cocktail which could open the door to a global recession?
Yeah, it's a dangerous and sort of unpleasant place to be in at the moment, isn't it, globally and in South Africa. I think we need to separate what we consider the looming signs of recession are versus what we're currently experiencing. And recession fears were heightened recently when we saw the yield curve for both the US and the UK invert. And basically that means that investors are very pessimistic about the time ahead. And usually this signals the start of a recession. But if we look at the fundamentals, US growth is still strong. Consumption is very strong. And the US continues to add job numbers. But we have a global situation, as you mentioned, with trade wars, the looming threat of Brexit, and the European economy has started to slow. So it very much feels like this is the early stages of a sharp slowdown in global growth, and possibly very pessimistic for the South African economy.
Those in the know talk about this inverted curve. What has history taught us, or even sentiment taught us, about how global investors and its economies react to these specific types of circumstances? Do they play it safe and stay away from markets such as ours?
Well, typically, I mean, the inverted yield curve, which is the difference between the long-term interest rates and the short-term interest rates, and typically long-term interest rates are always higher than short-term. This occurs when the opposite is true, and for the past 5 recessions, we've seen an inversion of the yield curve. So many have said, well, this is a clear sign that this is going to happen. But as I said, the fundamentals mean that we can't only rely on the yield curve for a sign of a recession, but the slowdown in Germany in its production, and then we've also seen an inversion of the UK yield curve suggests that we are likely to see the end of a global expansion. And I think in the immediate term, volatility, especially in emerging markets, is here to stay. Typically, when markets go through a difficult period like this, they crowd over to safe haven assets like dollars, like gold, and this means that emerging market currencies usually take a battering. South Africa is no different. We've seen the rand skyrocket up to around nearly 16 earlier today. This is mostly on global fears, but we also need to understand that we aren't doing ourselves any favors with uncertainty surrounding Eskom, with the NHI announcements. Investors haven't taken this positively, and it's likely to result in continued volatility for the rand, at least in the next couple of months.
What would investors, and I suppose people in your position who perhaps give investors advice, be looking to give us some kind of inkling as to what direction the global market and indeed the local market is going? We've heard repeatedly what many believe the president and government should be doing here in South Africa to try and get rid of those fears of instability here. But what are the sort of landmark things that you would be looking out for to give us an idea of which way we're going?
Well, this is a tricky one. Usually emerging markets, and they make up a very small percentage of the global market. So especially in South Africa's case, I think we saw something like the global South African economy makes up less than 1% of the global market. So we are very much at risk of just at the mercy of global markets. So when we have a downturn, when we have a financial crisis or a great recession like we saw a decade ago, typically we see a movement into safe havens like the dollar. The dollar strengthens and emerging currencies weaken. How we can protect ourselves from this is typically with sound fundamentals, with sound policy certainty. You'll remember in the previous Great Recession of 2009, the South African economy was able relatively to insulate itself by spending its way, creating jobs through a massive increase in the size of the public sector employment bill. Unfortunately, we aren't at this stage. Again, we've seen this has been harped on by many economists, and that the South African government just does not have the money to spend ourselves out of trouble this time. And this is very concerning, and we need to be aware that we need to be serious about our policy certainty, as this is really one of the few options we have. So a clear path on how we're going to restructure Eskom, and unfortunately, it will have to result in some very unpopular decisions. But I think at this stage we need to actually say, well, this is something we need to make on our own, or else we might find ourselves going to the IMF for assistance in early next year.
Gosh, and I'm sure most hope that that will not be the case. Thank you so much. Sam Rowland joining us via Skype.